Thanks, Dan. If I could invite our two panelists, Lisa Rich and Paula Veneri. I saw you in the audience. There you are. Please come on up. I am going to move this podium so that the panel is not obstructed. So hopefully I can pull that off. Thanks, James. Check. Anybody, can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I've seen Stan's presentation on the space economy in the region a number of times, and each time it gets better. So I think he does a great job of highlighting what's happening here. So we'll go into a little more detail, a little more specifics around our two topic areas today. So the hybrid space architecture and advanced energy and propulsion, and kind of what's happening here. This panel is designed as a primer going into the workshops. I expect we'll go into a whole lot more detail. So we'll go kind of medium level with this. So first, I would like to ask our two new panelists to introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about what you're doing with space today.
Let's see if this works. Great. Good morning. I'm Lisa Rich, founder and chief operating officer at Explore, which is in Redmond. We're very excited to be there, especially with the announcement of the Redmond Space District. Explore is building multi-sensor satellites. It's a platform that allows us to gather data from space and bring it back. Lots of excitement to talk to you about today, given the topic. So thank you for having me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paolo Veneri. I'm the Executive Vice President of Advanced Technologies at Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation. We're a nuclear company, about 300 going on 4, with a global presence. A large component of that presence is here in Seattle, where we have our Advanced Technologies group, which is about 50 so strong, focused entirely on the development of space nuclear technologies. And that varies from radioisotopes all the way up through nuclear thermal propulsion and fission power systems. Those advanced power systems and propulsion systems that Bucky was talking about earlier, that is our bread and butter. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Thank you both for being here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stan. So to start, now you've seen an overview of the economy, the space economy in the region. When we talk about space in the United States, you talk about hubs like Florida, Alabama, Colorado, Mexico. Seattle and the Pacific Northwest region don't often get a lot of airtime in that conversation. Why do you think that is?
I think that a lot of our activity and awareness of Seattle is just not known. So for the nation, space activity, even just with media, you're looking at a launch that happens in Florida, and that's exciting. But as far as activity west of California, I think there's a lot of quiet work that goes on here. Satellites are being built, SpaceX and all the software capabilities with Microsoft Azure, et cetera. That's quiet work. And so it's not a news story necessarily, but I think it needs to be.
So there's a couple things I actually can look at. Washington doesn't have a large FFRDC focused on space development, which means that it's not large government dollars coming into the state. If you look at Stan's chart, the $1 billion marks are commercial companies that are investing in the state. So it's built it's kind of a strength because it is a commercial space industry. It's not a government space industry, which is kind of unique.
Absolutely. So if we can talk more specifically on the topic areas and what's happening here in the region, hybrid space architecture and advanced power and propulsion, can you both give an overview generally of what's happening in those two areas in this region?
I think it's good to just kind of get a little groundwork with how we think about hybrid space architecture, what it it's a term that maybe is a little confounding to some people if they haven't really studied it yet. But there's a problem with latency in gathering data back from space. And so for the warfighter, when you have to have actionable information, and there's a latency problem because you're waiting for a satellite to fly over a ground station, when you have to make a decision in terms of the quality of information versus the quality of information to make that decision, that's a problem. So hybrid space architecture is important to us because we're looking to us, meaning at my company Explore, because we're seeing that independent satellites have capabilities. They might have one or two sensors. They might be relaying data down to ground stations, like with RBC that has 80 ground stations, or other ground station networks. But as you wait for a satellite to deliver that information to the ground, what if you had a satellite that, like Explore, is a platform and is collecting multiple types of data and has edge compute to process that data, and then is delivering only insights to the ground? So you don't have this issue of this massive quantity of data that has to come down to the ground, then be processed, then be transmitted to the person that has to make an important decision yesterday. So how do we, again, get to the insights that we need faster? And that's what we're working to solve at Explore. And I think it's very exciting. We are living in a transformative time with technology. In Space 1.0 companies, you had a satellite proving that it could collect one type of data, deliver that data to the ground. Now we have the ability to have synergies thanks to power. Paolo will get to this. The ability to have a lot of power on a satellite allows you to have multiple sensors on that satellite, and then use that power not only to gather and point, navigate, and task satellite, but to get the processing taken care of and then download it. So I think we're at a really transformative time. I'd like to just comment on what Bucky was saying about the sense of immediacy we need to have here and why the time is now. I think that it's too early until it's too late. I'd really like y'all to think about that. We have a problem with people saying, I'm not ready to talk about this now. Call me later when you fly. Well, the fact is, we're working on flying right now. We're in assembly, integration, and testing right now. We're flying as soon as we can. So if you're not preparing for what you can do once we fly right now, you will be too late.
So,
am I on a soapbox? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think of things that can add to the excellent points that were just made. I mean, I have a pretty central perspective on power and propulsion. I mean, my background is nuclear engineering, and when you look at what you can do in space, that's all inherently limited by how much power you can take with you and your propulsion capabilities, your delta V capability that you have with your spacecraft. Nuclear is one of those options that allows you to have both of those in a single spacecraft. You're able to pack delta Vs that you have currently no way of doing. You're able to put megawatts of power into a single spacecraft. You're able to do things that is not just sensing, is not passively observing what is happening around you. You're able to do active missions, active activities on the lunar surface, in lunar space, all because you have power. I mean, earlier we were talking about with Bucky is, if you just want to sit there and explore with robots, you can do it with a battery pack, easy. But if you want to have a permanent presence on the moon, if you want to have a permanent presence in lunar space, you need to pack a punch with it, both in terms of the activities that you want to do with it, but also maintain that toehold there to make sure that you are the one who is running that operation. All of those are aspects that we're currently working on, both in ultrasafe, avalanche energy, Blue Origin is working on things. A lot of that nexus is here in the Pacific Northwest.
As kind of was pointed out here, there's a lot of synergy between these two tracks here, if you will. If you think about how the data acceleration here on planet Earth and how we use so much more bandwidth. There's edge computing going on. There'll be computing in space. There's laser intersatellite links coming right now. The Space Development Agency just launched their Tranche 0. SpaceX Starlink is using laser intersatellite links right now, so that this all requires more power for compute, more power for transmission as we go out to the moon and beyond. Inverse square law dictates even more power. So there's a lot of synergy here between the whole hybrid space architecture and the power, advanced power aspects.
Great. So we've talked about the region from a high level. We've talked a little bit at the medium level with the 2 tracks. Lisa, Paulo, can you both talk about kind of why you located your companies here and why this region for your company is a good place to start and or grow?
So the Pacific Northwest is unique in the United States in that it has aerospace and nuclear all within the same region. I mean, Washington has Pacific National Laboratory. Idaho, right next door, has Idaho National Laboratory. You have I think the highest concentration of fusion companies and nuclear companies in Washington. You have this unique combination of workforce and talent that all touches on all of these areas that we're talking about, in propulsion and nuclear. That's principally why we're here. When you then cobble that all together, the bulk of the space nuclear programs that are coming out of the US government are based out of the Pacific Northwest. You look at the nuclear thermal propulsion and fission surface power programs that NASA is currently engaged in. Those are run out of Idaho National Laboratory. The radioisotope power program, that's run out of Idaho National Laboratory. The performers on nuclear thermal propulsion, fission surface power, a lot of them are here in Seattle. So simply put, the talent is here and they want to be here.
Excellent.
For us, we moved to the region originally years ago because we were interested in the space sector and knew that this was a hub of the space sector. We knew that the software development that would be working with satellites was going to be happening. Of course, Blue is here. Some really important, and the important history of Boeing that Paulo referred to, that you have aerospace engineering here, you have manufacturing here. We find that with our company, there are service providers down the street that we can go to for vibe testing, for production of our dummy plates and things that we need as we're developing and testing our satellites. So the fact that we can go across the street for testing is phenomenal. And those are resources that are really important for a small company that's growing. You don't want to be shipping your components to another state for testing. You want to be able to go across the street. So the fact that there's a cluster of capability in addition to the talent that's here is very valuable to us. In terms of the talent, the space sector requires very specialized talent and people that, for instance, have had their hands on a satellite before, have worked on flight software before. You're not going to find that in other states as concentrated as you have here. So it's wonderful to be in the state of Washington and have the resources we have, with as well the universities that we have here. Washington University, so phenomenal. So happy to have the talent here, and then have the exposure now with our Redmond Space District to elevate the area for the nation to understand that this is a hub of space to attract more talent here, which we all need and want.
One thing really quickly that I find interesting is that a lot of those logos on the slide there that I showed earlier, those are started by people who worked at Blue Origin, who worked at SpaceX, who worked at spaceflight, got some experience, and then started new companies. So we're starting to see this real flywheel effect here. And maybe in the future, your companies will be donating some people as well to the new space ecosystem here. But it's really cool to see that flywheel get going.
Absolutely, still turning. So we talked about why this region. Let's take a step back and think about national security as it relates to these two topical areas. Stan, you touched on part of that and some specific examples. Lisa, Paulo, and Stan. How do you see advanced power and propulsion hybrid space architecture, supporting the requirements of national security.
So on the power and propulsion side, I think we've talked about that quite a bit already. Power determines what you can do. Propulsion determines where you can go. If you're able to go farther than the next guy, it's a capability edge that you have over them significantly. If you have more power, you can do more. You can also think of it in terms of performance space. If you look at a fighter aircraft that has its performance map. You have a bigger map than they do. You have the edge in any type of engagement. Just from a very simple standpoint. From the humanitarian standpoint, from logistics, I mean, Stan talked about it earlier. If you have better sensors, better communication capabilities, the better you're able to transfer the information, the better you are able to communicate it, the better you're able to then also process that information, the more power and propulsion you have capabilities. One thing that I think is, that I would be remiss not to touch on is, we talk about advanced power and propulsion. It's not just new technology, it's also scale. My understanding is that Starlink has put up over 1 megawatt worth of solar power in the past couple of years. I mean, when's the last time there was 1 megawatt of solar in space before that? That itself, even though it's not a new technology, the sheer scope of what you can produce now and put into orbit, that's in on itself, I think, an advanced power capability. Just to make sure we don't forget about that.
I think I'm going to take this question in a little different direction as we think about the ecosystem and growing it. The space economy here has been smaller companies that are growing and seeking funding, and some dying out in the tough environment that we're in for investment. And what we're seeing happening, and what I think we need to see more of, is companies with strong capabilities that are finding alignment and merging to become bigger companies. We can't just continue with small companies popping up here and there and having this disbursement of small companies. We need companies to get bigger and stronger and to advance their capabilities. So I really encourage collaboration in the space sector of founders, of technologists, to find each other and say, how can we be stronger together? Because as we look at the hybrid space architecture, it means this network working together. So how do we forge those connections with one another and look at each other's capabilities and say, where can we partner? Where can we align? Where can we go into contract opportunities together? All of this can benefit the industry because we're not all Blue Origin with unlimited dollars to fund our companies. But how can we, as Stan likes to say, all continue to punch above our weight? But with combining companies, I think we're going to see more of that as a result of the economy, the SVB scenario, the struggle for funding that continues just because these are external factors that we face. But we need to make sure that we shore up our capabilities, and this is one way to do it.
Great. So we've talked about the national security side, started to talk about the commercial side. When we think from a commercial standpoint, what the benefits of working with national security, DoD, DIU, can you talk about how each of you look at that, the benefits of working together, goals and benefits?
So for us, the DoD is probably the first and biggest near-term customer, right? The DoD supplies or has a need for advanced capabilities that a lot of commercial industry just simply doesn't have. If you go talk to a commercial satellite constellation, they don't need hundreds of kilowatts. They need a couple kilowatts, maybe 10, and that's a big burden on the commercial space. And so what the DoD does is provide that pull for that technology development. And that does a couple things. One, it allows us to then develop to a stated need, to a performance need and a customer need. The second thing that it does is that it actually provides that pull that allows us to get across that valley of death. That's one of the biggest things one of the biggest issues you have with how business has happened in the past with SBIRs, phase 1s, phase 2s. You get to this really neat technology demonstration point, and then there's nobody to pull it up to the point where it's a phase 3, and then there's a commercial company that's then buying tens, hundreds of these. So what the DoD can do is really be that pull that carries you across that finish line. The other big thing that the DoD does is provide an internal push to resolve regulatory questions. With nuclear, as some of you might know, there's not been a commercial nuclear launch ever. But there is now a mandate from presidential directives that there needs to be a way to launch commercial nuclear spacecraft. But the FAA just hasn't gotten around to it. They're supposed to do this 2 years ago. They say, cool, we're working on it. We don't want to give you instructions that will mislead you, yada, 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 yada. But until there's a mission, they will not actually issue that guidance. The DoD is doing actually great work on this with projects such as the DARPA Draco program, or DIU's own Nuclear Advanced Power Propulsion program, to push the FAA into resolving these questions, provide the guidance, then allows us to have the regulatory certainty that we developed this new technology and capability. Yes, you can launch it. So to sum it up, DoD does 3 things: provides a pull for technology development, provides a customer pull to get across that valley of death, and then a push internal to the government to resolve those regulatory questions.
For our DoD, the value that we have from the DoD, I would say it's more the engagement that we've had over the course of our company's development and their willingness to continue to be briefed on what we're doing and help us find the alignments with their strategy. So that's always important, because a company may have its own strategy, but if the dollars are coming from DoD, you want to be flexible enough to take advantage of being able to pivot and be of service to meet their needs. So that's something that I think is always important, is being flexible to be building capabilities that are of benefit to DoD. The other side of this is that they're looking for opportunities to fund commercial capabilities that may not really have markets yet. So the market right now is Earth observation. The need right now is space situational awareness. So Earth observation is one category, SSA is another, and oh, by the way, between here and the moon, cislunar space, there aren't commercial companies wanting to pay you for that data right now, but DoD is wanting that information. So as Paolo was referring to, there's a pull factor of being able to support capabilities and get them over the finish line so that we can provide services that are needed by DoD that aren't commercial activities yet. So we need that financial support to build out cislunar capabilities, for example.
In this workshop here over the next day and a half, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the things that need to be improved. And I just want to make a quick point. If you talk to a lot of Europeans, they'll tell you that they're jealous of the way the government in the United States engages with space companies, whether it's on NASA, the DoD side. There's this mantra you probably heard, build what we must, buy what we can. That approach is really, it goes through NASA, DoD, and it's really a cutting edge. And I know we can improve on it here, and we'll be talking about that today. But the way that the federal government is engaging to promote the space industry here is actually something we should be grateful for.
Excellent. So looking forward in the next 5 or 10 years, what does hybrid space architecture, advanced power and propulsion look like, and what does an ideal partnership with DoD look like?
Well, one of the interesting things to advance hybrid space architecture from a commercial perspective is having a commercial company with more of a business mindset to strategize, because you have to make this viable as a commercial activity. So a company that, for example, for our company to be working with Microsoft Azure and their partner program to work on edge compute, we will be doing this, but we have to have the minds putting their heads together to say, how do we build the commercial model for that? How do you contract for that? It's simple to say, oh, you're going to put algorithms up into your satellite and you're going to process it online and you're going to bring data back. But how does that financially have value for a company? And putting those pieces to the puzzle together are not simple. So there's a business aspect to this that requires resolution in addition to just meeting the needs that are the activities for the warfighter. So I think businesses that space companies with capabilities that have that mindset of how do we make sense of all this and build it out into a financial revenue generating model, because it has to exist separate from the dollars that are provided by the DoD, of course, is what we're going to be getting to in the near future with our partners.
So right now I think there's like 4 space nuclear programs within the US government. You've got 2 NASA fission programs. You've got the DARPA Draco program that wants to demonstrate nuclear propulsion in orbit. There is an upcoming JETSON call out of Air Force Research Laboratory. DIU has a nuclear program, or space nuclear program. All of these have in their schedules a in-space demonstration of nuclear capabilities within the next 5-6 years. Honestly, I think we can do that. If we buckle down and really commit to doing it, all these programs have a pathway to success. So within the next 5 years, I would really like to see, all of these having flight hardware in orbit demonstrating that the United States can develop and deploy space nuclear capabilities, which allows us to get to the next step, which is within the next 10 years of actually doing and deploying meaningful capabilities, not just demonstrations. Ideally, within 10 years, the technology for a fission reactor in orbit on the lunar surface has been demonstrated to the point where government or a private entity can issue a power purchase agreement for power on the lunar surface. And all of that needs to happen pretty briskly. I think it's otherwise someone else is going to do it before us.
Okay, well, I thought this was an excellent discussion and primer for the workshops. So thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Stan. I'm going to hand it over to Mike Doyle to help us transition to out of the plenary.